Good morning, everyone. Hi. It's so wonderful to be here with you all. I I can't see this virtual world is odd, but I know you're there from the wonderful list of nearly 200 people who've already registered on Hopin this morning and are with us. So welcome to you all. We've got about 400 people in total registered for the event, so it should be a busy couple of days. We have 74, I think it is, events over these 3 days. So absolutely lots going on. I'll give you a bit more info about some of today's events in a moment. But before I get into all this festival stuff, firstly, who am I? Why am I speaking to you? So I'm Giselle. I'm Executive Director of DataKind UK. We're a charity that helps other charities use data science. But we've got a talk later in the day, so you can hear more about us then if you wish. My hat that I'm wearing now is, of course, of your host for the festival, and I'll be around these 3 days and every morning welcoming you in. And if any point you need me, just ping me, and I'll be around. But I am your only face you see on screen now, but I am not your only host. We have, in fact, 27 supporting partner organisations who've helped us make this event possible. Massive thank you to you all, to the input from choosing speakers, to figuring out what we should be doing for this wonderful event in the first place. You've been here every step of the way, so thank you. A few more thank yous as well. We've got wonderful sponsors, Softwire, Data Lab, Teradata, and so thank you for your support. And of course to grant maker Esme Fairbairn Foundation, who gave us the funds to get started over a year ago now. So thank you so much to you all. And then of course you all, thank you for being here. I know it's a busy time. I know that because I speak to a lot of charities daily, but because of course we are also one, and it's been a roller coaster of a 2020 and a 2021, and not always a roller coaster, which gives us a lot of breathing room. So thank you so much for taking some time out to be here. I hope you can turn off whatever it is that pings you in the background, whether it's Slack or Teams or your phone. I hope you can find a little bit of time to really immerse yourself in the festival. Take some time for yourself and your development, and get some great insights you can take back to your organisation. So I would not, of course, be able to open a big event like this without a bit of housekeeping. Our housekeeping today is around Hopin. So you've all made it here. Wonderful. This is my first use of Hopin, maybe yours as well. So a few points about how to navigate. So right now we're on the stage where a bunch of the events are going to take place. Along the left-hand side, you should see a bunch of options to navigate around. If you're on a very small screen, click a kind of spirally burger menu, and that will help you get to those options. One of those is the reception area, so you'll find the full program there, and also the ability to move across different event areas. From there you can go to the sessions area, so we've got the stage and then the sessions area. They're kind of the two places where events take place. You can, of course, also head over to our expo, where there's a bunch of stands from sponsors and partners, and hear more about what others do. And then there's a networking area that I've seen get busy this morning already. It allows you to be randomly matched with another attendee for a 3-minute chat. I think this is such wonderful serendipity that we're trying to add back into our virtual lives. So please get involved. That's open daily at 9 to 9:30 to meet people over your morning brew, and also throughout the breaks throughout the day, or each day, every day. And if you do want to see who's joined the event, this as you could look around a room at an actual conference, we have the next best thing. We have a list. So click the event toggle on the right hand side of your screen, and you can select people, the people list, and then just keep loading that. There's an option to keep loading more people at the bottom, and you can just scroll through and then message people, invite to a video call, that kind of thing. If you have any issues during the event, technical or otherwise, then contact our wonderful event organisers. You'll find them in that very same people list. So the names you want to remember are Sophie Flanagan and Claire Nicholson. They should be highlighted in blue on that list, and just let them know you've got a bit of an issue and they can help you out. Looking outside our hop-in room, we have, of course, the whole wide world to tell about our fest and share some of our experiences. So please do tweet. That's the main way we can think to do that. Though shouting over to the living room that you're enjoying your session will be just as good as well. If you do want to tweet, it's Data4GoodFest. That's our Twitter handle, and also the same thing as a hashtag Data4GoodFest. And I've talked a little bit about those kind of networking and various functions. We want to incentivize people to be brave and chat to each other. So at the end of the day, I'll be announcing some prize winners based on who's done the most in the chat and who's done the most networking and who's gone to the most expo booths. We are, of course, big fans of data, and we are going to use the data we have about how you're all moving out to make sure that you get a bit of a prize if you've been particularly active. We've got things like wonderful Data for Good t-shirts, and also some great books on ethics, on strategy, visualization, that kind of thing. We'll let you know in the afternoon if you're a winner. I'm already over time. I'm going to introduce Jeni, our first speaker of the day, in a moment. But before I do, just a very quick heads up about some other things that are going on today. So we have 40 people sharing their experiences, expertise, ponderings, provocations today. We've got 6 charities sharing their data journeys. We've got 8 How Do I sessions. We've got 3 diversity, equality and inclusion sessions. We've got 2 funder perspectives, and more. So absolute loads going on. Please do go to our website, where you probably would have seen the original program when you bought your ticket. Go there, have a look. It's still the best source of information about what's going on today. So now we have the wonderful Jeni Tennison from the ODI. Jeni is VP and Chief Strategy Advisor of the Open Data Institute, one of the best job titles I think we all agree. Jeni's going to kick us off with some provocations on data sharing and stewardship in the social sector. The ODI and Jeni in particular have been really thoughtful on what the future might look like as we use more data, try and be very responsible in how we share and access that data. So I'm really looking forward to hearing about what the future might hold in that respect. So Jeni, I'm going to kick it over to you.
Thanks so much, Giselle, and thanks so much for inviting me to speak to you all here today. I'm going to try to share my screen so that you can see some slides that I've done. And there we go. Hopefully you can see that. Yeah, so as Giselle said, and I'm going to talk to you today about data sharing and stewardship in the social sector. And just a bit of background, I am Jeni Tennison, Vice President, Chief Strategy Advisor at the Open Data Institute, which is frankly all of the good things about being CEO, but none of the very difficult things about it, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. The ODI was founded in 2012, and we're an international independent not-for-profit based in London that has a vision of a world where data works for everyone. And we particularly focus on working with companies and governments to build towards that vision, an open and trustworthy data ecosystem. What I want to talk to you about today is really 3 things. So first of all, how we should see data, not as something that kind of falls from the sky and we happen to have and are able to take advantage of, but as infrastructure that we build and choose how to build. I then want to talk about the real importance of organizations that steward that data, what we call data institutions. And then I want to talk a little bit about how organizations in the social sector are really important as data institutions and how it applies in that kind of context. So first of all, talking about data as infrastructure. You all know, because you're here at this festival, that decision makers across a community can benefit from data. And if you think about it, in the social sector, there are really like 3 different types, I would say. So data can help decision makers who are researching and funding what is going on within civil society in the social sector understand challenges, understand impact, direct resources towards where it's needed. Non-profits themselves can also use data in order to prioritize their efforts to operate more efficiently and effectively, so in their day-to-day operations. And also data and availability of data can help the people and communities that organizations in the social sector serve to get support that they need for themselves and to advocate for themselves. And to just give some examples of that, of those 3 different kind of levels of decision making, I'm sure you all know about 360 Giving as a source of information about grants data, and there in order to support effective funding of the social sector. I'm sure you also all know about the work that Citizens Advice has been doing in monitoring the kinds of requests that come into it, the kinds of things that people are asking for, that they're looking for on their website, in order to identify trends that help to understand citizen needs and how those are changing over time. And that can help to direct resources into creating support for these areas where need really exists. And then the final example of data helping people and communities is an example from our own portfolio at ODI, Open Active. Open Active is an initiative to support the publication of data about physical activity. And the goal of it is to enable people to be more active, and especially to get into people who aren't otherwise active, in particular, older people or people with kids. And by publishing information about where there are opportunities to be active, that helps people to self-select and find the activities that suit them. So data doesn't just help within funders and within nonprofits, but it can also be part of the tool set that we use in order to achieve charitable objectives. The way we think of how you unlock value from data is that those decision makers are really essential for actually getting the positive impact from data. There's no point in having data around if nobody's using it in order to change the way in which they act and what they do. And the best value that we get from any data is when there's lots of decision makers, many different people and organizations making decisions off the back of it. But decision makers don't go in and process data themselves. They need people to create tools and insights, visualizations, different kinds of products and services to help decision makers use data to make decisions. And those tools and services wouldn't exist if they didn't have the data itself. So the importance of stewarding data and then sharing it so that it can be used by those different kinds of tools and services is really, really essential. We view this data that underpins the analyses and the tools and the insights and underpins decision making as being a form of infrastructure. It's an infrastructure that we rely on in the same way as we rely on our electricity grid or the road system. And the importance of recognizing it as infrastructure is, as I said right at the start, it isn't something that falls from the sky. It's something we build, and we choose how to build it. We choose who gets involved in building what our infrastructure looks like. When we talk about data as being infrastructure, we're not just talking about the data itself, though obviously that's really important, but also standards and technologies to help use data, the policies and guidance that help you put boundaries around the way in which data is used, whether it's good or bad. And the stewards and institutions that manage data, that maintain it and build it and enable others to use it. And then we also need to think about the stakeholders and communities, everybody who uses data, who contributes to it, who is monitored, who in any way touches that data ecosystem is part of the infrastructure and part of what we need to consider when we're creating an infrastructure that supports our decision making in any particular sector. So I want to focus in particular on those data institutions that steward data, the organizations that are there that maintain data, share it out, and what kinds of things they need to do. In order for data to flow to the places where it's needed, there are often different challenges that we encounter from sector to sector. One main one is increasing access to data. So enabling organizations to work and innovate together using common data, maybe using benchmarking in order to understand how, say, one organization is doing relative to another so that we can learn and get better. And really building on it, that common data infrastructure, making sure that there's access to it for everybody that needs it. But maintaining that data, because it needs to be used in so many different kinds of ways, and because it touches on people's lives, especially when they're the source of data, you need organizations also to balance conflicting views, different kinds of incentives between those who have data, perhaps because they naturally collect it as part of their operations, those who could use it, perhaps researchers who wouldn't otherwise generate it, and those who are affected by the way it gets used. So the recipients of decisions, the victims of decisions that arise from data. All of those different views and incentives and priorities need to be balanced somehow. And we also need to reduce the costs of stewarding data. If every organization has its own kind of data pools, as often happens, smaller organizations often really struggle to manage data in the way that, in the best way possible, just because resources are stretched. So there's also a driver around reducing the costs of stewarding data by making a common service that helps that to happen. So these are all drivers towards centralized organizations, more centralized organizations managing different kinds of data. We've been looking at ODI at different kinds of ways of providing access to data and created this pseudo map of the different kinds of things that people talk about when they talk about sharing data. And some of them are really technical, things like dashboards or creating synthetic data. Some of them are about how we share data. So the concept of data philanthropy, of sharing data for kind of altruistic purposes. And others are a bit more kind of around governance and the way in which we manage those different kinds of priorities that I talked about, whether it's through the creation of personal data stores where you really put the kind of individual that data is about first, or concepts like data trusts, which are much more about kind of collective governance and management of data. And it's these ones in the middle, in the island that we call Labrador, that we're particularly interested. We've been interested in at ODI for a little while. And these are collective mechanisms for managing data. And on the right, then there are things like data markets and clearing houses and exchanges that try to get a kind of transactional piece around data sharing. On the left are things like the platforms, the technology that's used in order to manage data sharing. But it's the ones right in the middle in that governor's island area, data trusts, cooperatives, commons, clubs, where governance is the big kind of thing that enables collaboration to happen that we're particularly interested in. And those are what we call data institutions. And the idea there of the institutions is to reflect the fact that they're long-lasting organizations, but also that they have some kind of public purpose, because institutions tend to have a public purpose, a wider purpose than just serving themselves. So we define data institutions as organizations whose purpose involves stewarding data on behalf of others to unlock economic, social value, environmental value, and so forth. So to have some kind of public good purpose. So stewarding data on behalf of some community, on behalf of the organizations that collect it, that can use it, that it's about as well. And there are different kinds of models that these take. Some of them hold data on behalf of an organization or person or group of those, and then share it out to others, particularly to researchers or innovators for some particular purpose. Some of them provide a more active kind of service of combining and linking data from different sources, providing insights and providing those back to perhaps those that have contributed data. And some of them are just there maintaining common data infrastructure, for example, registering identifiers or having standards, things that are just required across a particular sector. And for those of you that are more pictorially oriented, this is another kind of way of thinking about the way that these work. And this is a particular form called data trust, but actually this diagram works for lots of different data institutions. The institution itself is the yellow circle right at the top there, takes data from data providers, those that collect data, and it provides it out through some kind of gating mechanism, usually to people who want to use it. And the idea is that this creates a kind of positive cycle where data providers collect data about the world, which might include people in the world. The data trust then helps to make sure that that data gets shared with the users that then benefit back to the world, in particular the people within that world and the communities within that world. And so it creates this kind of positive cycle where data gets shared and that shares back value. To give a couple of examples, one example that I really like is Worker Info Exchange, which is a data union that brings together data to empower workers. So this is, for example, data from Uber drivers being able to share data about their own journeys and their own experiences, and then being able to use that to negotiate better with Uber is the idea. Or things like, but it doesn't have to be personal data like that. Things like Open Apparel Registry are a data institution that manages common data infrastructure, common data sets about the clothing factories around the world, which helps to support reporting that fashion suppliers do about where the clothes that they sell are actually getting built and created, and what the conditions are within those particular factories. The key features of a data institution is they have to have this like strong purpose, some kind of intrinsic motivation that determines how they share data. They need to be trustworthy and trusted, particularly when they hold data that can be very sensitive, and they need to be sustainable. They have to have business models that provide for longevity, because when we're building infrastructure, it needs to be reliable, and data institutions that maintain our infrastructure need to be particularly reliable. We see a lot of interest in these new forms of data institution right now. So data trust, data cooperatives, data unions, data altruism organizations, as they're called in the Data Governance Act from the EU, are all kind of new forms of data institution that people get very excited about right now. But what we recognize at ODI is that there are also existing data institutions that we've had for ages and forever, or feels like it. So national statistics offices, biobanks, company registers, meteorological offices, they're all data institutions that collect data, often as part of their public purpose, and share it out to others so that we can all benefit from it. And there's a third type that we think is particularly interesting. So this is existing institutions, existing organizations that already have already trusted by their stakeholder community, already fulfill some kind of hub kind of role within a particular set of stakeholders, but that could take on new data duties as part of that role. So as part of fulfilling their broader purpose, which is already kind of nailed down that they've been delivering for so long, that they could use data as part of what that purpose looks like. And that's an area that we think is really interesting. So what does this all mean for the social sector? I'm going to talk about two main points that I really want you to take as kind of takeaways from this. First of all, when we look at the data institutions that are maintaining some of this common data infrastructure, organizations like 360 Giving or Open Active, they're non-profit organizations. And the reason that they're non-profits is because they need to be independent from private interest in order to do their job well, in order to share data according to their purpose. So many of these data institutions that we see are non-profit organizations. Another example, Democracy Club is an organization that brings together data about elections and where elections are happening, who the candidates are, where you can go and vote, and so on. A number of services that are essential citizen-facing pieces of infrastructure for elections that get used massively during the election period, as has just happened, but is an independent, not-for-profit that is surviving in just the same way as other non-profits have to survive, despite providing this really basic infrastructure. And there are real challenges for organizations like that we've seen in the research that we've done. First of all, that the need for this data infrastructure generally isn't recognized as a charitable purpose, right? It's not, data has become one of these pieces of infrastructure, but we haven't really caught up about what that means in terms of the types of organization that are necessary to support it and what kind of support they need. They struggle because they tend to be removed from direct impact with citizens or communities. They are providing data that then gets used by another whole set of organizations to then have impact with citizens and communities. And that one step removed piece makes it hard for them to measure and describe the kind of impact that they have. And of course, they suffer, as many nonprofits do, from lumpy project funding. When you're providing infrastructure that is necessary, that needs to be there as a sustained service, it's very hard to maintain that through kind of project funding. And so, as with many nonprofits, I know this isn't just limited to data institutions, but it is one of the things that we've identified through our work on sustainability that is a real problem for them. So this is my first kind of message. How is it that we can recognize and support these kinds of organizations that are providing essential data infrastructure that are nonprofits? How can we fund them better? And then the second thing is to think more around what data infrastructure is needed in the social sector and who needs to step up to kind of provide that and support it. Some social sector data infrastructure is either missing or it's inaccessible. And if you think about it and drawing on some of the early work around the data collective, there's data that's about people's needs, what kind of needs people have in different areas or different kind of communities, who needs what. There's data about what support civil society is providing, where, for whom, how effective it is, what's getting funding, what isn't. And then there's a whole set of topic-specific data sets to support, say, social care, education, housing, green activities, or whatever that we need to think about. And where charities, not-for-profits that are working in a particular sector could collaborate to maintain some of that data infrastructure. Now, I talked earlier about the different kind of types of data institution, and I think that as these needs kind of come to the fore, then we probably will need some new data institutions. But I'm much more interested in how existing organizations might take on some of these new data duties. So, for example, in the public sector, how could existing registers and surveys that are currently published as and made available as open data in various ways, how can they better serve the needs of the sectors? How can they be oriented towards supporting decision-making in nonprofits and so forth? For funders, funders are stepping outside of looking at just at the kind of support that they provide to their grantees through funding. Could data provision be one of the kinds of support that you offer to organisations? Could providing information, for example, if you're a funder in a particular geospatial area, could providing information about that particular area be something that helps to support the grantees that you have? And for large CSOs, could stewarding data for your community be one way of meeting your charitable objectives, something that helps other CSOs in your sector, but also maybe gets data into the hands of the people and communities that you're trying to support? What does that look like? So those are my provocations. Just to summarize, data is a new form of infrastructure, something that we have to invest in and think about how we build it so that it's fit for purpose, something that we can all rely on, that it is there and meets our needs. We need data institutions, these organizations that can act independently in order to steward it. But how should they be supported? What are the common data needs, particularly across the social sector? And how could existing organisations step up to meet them? Thanks so much for listening. I'm looking forward to the chat. And I think that Giselle hopefully is going to join to help with the questions, but I'm going to have a look at the questions that have come up on the site. So I'm going to use the number of thumbs up to try and filter those. So question from Ali Hambury: is there a common understanding or working definition of what people mean by data? Good question. I think that there isn't, and people tend to have a very broad kind of view of what data really means. For me, I found that trying to get to a very specific definition actually isn't all that helpful. It's much more interesting to look in a particular, say, sector or around a particular kind of challenge and work out what information is needed and where the originating data for that information kind of comes from in order to get to the definition of what data is necessary for that particular challenge. So I wouldn't spend too long worrying too much about definitions. Spend more time looking at what the challenges are and where information can help meet those kinds of needs.
Thank you, Jenny. And sorry, I was late making you do your own questions with technical difficulties. I mean, I think that the upvoting is a great way to go about this. So please do, if you're listening, go to the Q&A panel. So if you, on the right hand side, you click the bit that says stage on the top right, and then you'll see a few options. Go to the Q&A, either add your own or upvote it. Right now we've got a popular question actually from Dulcie, who's our data science lead at DataKind, asking, looking globally, what data institutions should we be looking to as our guides? Who are the leading lights in this? Who's good on data stewardship? So yeah, this is a great question. I always like the kind of who should we copy, who should we emulate, and maybe who should we avoid as well. Questions kind of lead us.
Thanks. So I think that I have two answers for that. One answer is that, as I highlighted, there are many data institutions that have been around for absolutely ages and that therefore have kind of been through the ringer on what it looks like to do good data governance, good data stewardship. I would particularly point at, for example, the Office of National Statistics as an organization like that, right? Now, those organizations are often have challenges of coming to grips with the new kinds of challenges that data institutions have. So in particular, changing expectations around data governance and the involvement of people and communities in making decisions around how data is shared. And they may have because of their kind of historic shape, where data was not as important as had a more restricted set of people that could use it and that wanted to use it. They may also have restrictions around their business models as not being actually fit for purpose. Office of National Statistics doesn't fall into that category. They moved ages ago into viewing data and statistics as a public good and therefore putting it out. But other organizations, like, for example, the Ordnance Survey, have really not moved with the times in terms of or with the need in terms of the business models that they create. The second bit is, where are the new forms of data institution? And I've tried to highlight some of those during the talk that I gave. So, for example, the worker info exchange example, I think, is a really interesting one in providing and fulfilling a particular niche. But these new data institutions are very new, and therefore they have or may have teething problems in terms of where they go. We've got a whole bunch of kind of case studies and different kinds of explanations and descriptions on the ODI website if you want to look more at different kinds of data institutions and be inspired by them.
Thank you. There's our two most popular questions now. You can probably I guess when you get a bunch of organizations together who want to do this kind of stuff, of course, the question that's going to come up is there support? Is there funding? And actually we see in the a lot of grant making still doesn't kind of prioritize or give support to data work or a lot of kind of forms of infrastructure work, I suppose. So I'm gonna take our two most popular questions on this together. So James Tulloch, sorry if I'm saying that wrong, James, is asking any examples of funders supporting data provision to grant holders as you described. And then Owen Bowden asking a related question, is there existing support to help shape data co-ops or new data institutions? So I guess the questions there about support to kind of individual organizations and then to perhaps to spring up new organizations.
So I think one of the organisations that helps fund today, Esme Fairbairn Foundation, is one of the organisations I point to as a funder that is stepping up in this space. You know, has supported 360 Giving for a number of years, for example, and kind of recognises that. But that was one of the reasons why I was highlighting it as being a particular need. I think it is recognised and underrepresented within the funder community from what I've seen. There are organisations particularly in the States that are kind of really data aware, that are thinking of these. So we get some funding, for example, from the McGovern Foundation, who are really interested in the role of data and data science in advancing kind of public purposes. And so they might be another kind of organization that I point to. And in terms of existing support to help shape them, this is one of the things that we've been trying to develop at ODI. We've run a number of different kind of stimulus funds and peer networks within different kinds of organizations that are trying to step up to create data co-ops and institutions. And also created a whole bunch of materials and guidance and that kind of support, because we do think that it's really important, and currently fundraising in order to help provide more support, in particular kind of low-level mentoring support for these kinds of organisations.
Okay, thank you. So we have 1 minute. I'm going to throw two final questions at you, and perhaps we can have kind of the quick 20 seconds on each. So Charity Commission, what's the role of them in all this? That's from James Bowles. And then one that I do want to make sure you get to, because I know ODI had loads of great stuff on this. Alistair Alexander asking, do you have a suggested framework for what data can and should be collected and shared, and what data should not be collected and shared?
Cool. So in terms of Charity Commission, so I'd like to see Charity Commission and the organisation that regulates around community interest companies as well, recognise that maintaining data infrastructure can be a charitable objective in and of itself. And I think that even just like recognising and advancing that as a role would be really helpful. And then in terms of thinking about what data can and should be collected and shared and what shouldn't be, you can't split it up based on data. You have to be splitting it up and thinking about it in terms of what you're doing, who the affected communities are, what your aims are. And there are a couple of tools that we now maintain. One is the consequence scanning toolkit that was originally developed by .everyone, but we also have the data ethics canvas, which we developed, which is much more around critical thinking about who gets affected by data collection, who gets affected when it gets shared, who gets affected when it gets used, and how do you mitigate risks and harms that there might be around those. And so don't think about it in terms of what data, think about it in terms of building into your processes and your systems the asking of questions, critical reflection on what might happen and how to meet that, and be transparent about it. Final point, be transparent about what you're doing.
Yeah, a very pertinent note to end on. Yeah, whatever you do it out in the open. That's great advice. Thank you so much, Jeni. This has been a really thought-provoking way to open up our festival and start conversations. And from the amount of chat and the amount of questions, I suspect our audience agree to. So thank you so much for your time. We are now going to say bye to Jeni. And oh, Jeni's gone. It's all very very automatic, this new world. And say hello to Alex, who's going to be talking about their experiences using data at Moorfields Eye Hospital. And you're also going to say goodbye to me. So hello, Alex, and bye all. I will see you later. Do we have Alex? Oh. Sorry, everyone, bear with us. We're gonna get Alex on in a second. Actually, while I have you, if you've signed up for our festival mailing list when you bought your ticket, we sent out a mailer this morning which summarises what's on today. So if you're looking at the programme and thinking, gosh, this is a lot, how do I get my head around this? We thought that too. So open up your inboxes and take a look. Hopefully we will have Alex shortly. Well, I think Alex is having some tech difficulties. So while I have the stage, I'll pull out a few of the interesting things that were coming out of our chat earlier. So I think Dulcie has highlighted .everyone's consequence scanning. So there was that question about kind of what you should share and what you shouldn't share. We really like .everyone's consequence scanning as a way to try and tackle that question. So .everyone, we're kind of technology and society think tank, they don't exist anymore. But this essentially lets you ask questions about kind of what would happen if, and is I think the kind of what would happen if is a great question to ask before you, particularly kind of with data sharing, before you do anything, and also to center those kind of what ifs around your beneficiaries and the people for whom the data is about, as well, which .everyone focused on. We have a great example from Emily Bell, the local data project from the Women's Budget Group. Wonderful. So Trust for London and Smallwood funded that. So perhaps that kind of hints at an answer to one of the questions around where's the funding for these projects. Again, Trust for London coming up with a poverty profile. And actually, well, that was from Kate. So Kate, a wonderful example of how to support these projects, because Kate at Superhighways runs DataWise London. So again, another London-centric. So I apologise for everyone, including me, who's not in or work with their work focused on London. But a really great project there of how to support organisations to work in partnership. Oh, I think we have Alex. Alex, can you hear me there?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Wonderful, I can. Should I hand over to you? Are you?
Yeah, let me just get my slides up. I'm sorry about that, everyone. but technical troubles and these days are quite normal now, aren't they?
Yeah.
Okay, I think my slides are up, so hopefully everyone can see that.
Them.
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay. Yes. Brilliant. Thank you, Goodell. Sorry about that, everyone. But yes, I'm Alex. I'm one of the technical consultants at Softwire, and I'm going to be talking to you a bit about our works at Moorfields Eye Hospital, and specifically on the Insight project. But before that, let me just tell you a bit about Softwire and about me. So Softwire was founded in 2000 as a full-service agency covering the whole software and application lifecycle. Over our time, we've worked with a huge range of clients, including a host of government departments, charities, and private organisations. And we've done quite a lot of work in the healthcare sector as well. I started work at Softwire in September 2019. And since my time working at Softwire, I've spent 15 months working at Moorfields on our Moorfields project. So Moorfields Eye Hospital, for those who are not aware, is a leading eye hospital based in London. It's based in Old Street in London, and it has a really great building. If you're ever walking past, do have a look. And it's a world-class data focused on research. So they do a lot of eye research, and their ophthalmology research is some of the best in the world. And they have a very good connection with UCL and lots of UCL researchers working within the hospital on a load of different projects. Some background on just ophthalmology, so your eye care. It's the busiest medical specialty in the UK. There's over 2 million people currently in the UK living with sight loss, and 360,000 people are considered blind or partially sighted. Most importantly, it's very easy to treat a lot of the eye diseases if you catch them early, and there's a lot of very good eye care out there that can stop you losing your eyesight or going blind. The issue here is that it does need to be caught early, and if you don't catch early, you will get eyesight loss, and there's no way to stop it once you pass like certain points. Of note, just recently, a couple of weeks ago in the BBC, there was a very big article about some new gene therapies that Moorfields have been researching that has got even better success rates now at stopping eye loss. So a bit about Moorfields and just what data Moorfields has. So Moorfields has clinical data from the start of the early 2000s stored in electronic forms in their data warehouses. All of this data has come from a variety of different clinical systems and a variety of different clinical scanners and manufacturers. So the big one here is they have over 10 million eye scans. These come from 5 to 6 different manufacturers for different machine types, and each of these manufacturers have 2 to 3 different machines. Each manufacturer will use its own proprietary format for storing both the images and the metadata, with their own proprietary backing databases for this metadata as well. On the clinical side, Moorfields uses 3 different clinical systems for storing the clinical data. They have well over 100 million records. Just the prescriptions table is 200 and something million unique records. The clinical data, again, is the different systems will use their own different proprietary formats for storing it. Most of these are databases, but the terminology they use can sometimes mean the same thing, but be completely different, and sometimes have the same words and mean completely different things. Of note as well, especially in a clinical setting, you'll find that most of the data that any doctor wants to use for research is written in clinical letters, which again is a very hard way to pull the data out of, and often handwritten notes. So how did we get started with Moorfields, and what have we been doing for Moorfields? So back in 2016, Moorfields asked us to help them produce a single data set of eye scans along with their metadata for their work with Google's DeepMind, producing a way of a machine learning system to detect AMD and a variety of other eye diseases. After we did the work producing that system, over the next couple of years, we were working with Moorfields to produce an archive of eye scans where we pulled all of the different eye scans from the hardware manufacturer's proprietary software into a single data warehouse where you had all the scans in a common format with all of the metadata queryable. And we were using that to produce some research data sets with the researchers and continuing to enable them to do research. From 2019 to present, we've been starting to build a research platform for Moorfields. So this is an individual platform where researchers can query the data themselves along with all the clinical data and automate the process of building the data sets from that data. We've also been working with Moorfields on the Insight Hub as part of HDRUK, which is taking that data from just being Moorfields data and making it available to the wider public through the HDRUK Hub. So one of the big things that we've been working on is this research-focused storage. So the aim of this is to not have an impact on clinical services and to store the data in a much better format for doing research. So when we think of research, there's a couple of things that are different to the clinical way of storing data. The first one is we don't care about which supplier the data has come from. So we want to somehow come up with a supplier agnostic way of storing the data. And the second one is that we're going to be doing this on pseudonymized data because we don't want to be identifiable when we're doing it for research. And the scale of the questions we are asking can be very different to a clinical service. So as a clinical service, I will maybe ask for at most a clinic's worth of data. So that might be 10, 100 patients, but never more than that. For research, we're regularly querying hundreds of thousands of patients, and that can have a massive impact on the clinical services if we were to hit them. And we never want to take away from the clinical services. So as such, we store all of our data separately in a completely different copy and in a completely different schema that's more focused for this large scale querying of the data. And it's pseudonymized and opt-out aware, so it's got all of your information governance concerns considered and factored into the storage. How we do this and how we do this securely at Moorfields is we have this architecture that you'll see here that I'll talk you through. So over here on the left, we have the Moorfields systems. So this is all sits within Moorfields on site. And on the right, we have our platform, which is all built on Google Cloud with a couple of different levels of VPCs and service perimeters. Of note, this whole platform can only be accessed via the Moorfields network. So you have to be connected to Moorfields or via their VPN or on site to get access. Plus there's some other security perimeters. So how this works is the first thing we do is we read all of the image file shares. So we look for every single hardware manufacturer. They're storing their images on some file share somewhere. We're looking at those raw sources and we are processing these on a massive Kubernetes cluster, which is just a massive amount of computers that are all running, processing the images into an open format. So that's the open source DICOM format, and extracting the metadata into a database. From this point, we combine that metadata from the database with the clinical metadata that we're pulling from all of the clinical systems, and we are then pseudonymizing it. So this is applying opt-out, but also making sure that we can't go from any of these records back to a patient at Moorfields. We write out quality improvement information. So this is any errors we see. The most common of this is that we'll find the days and months of someone's date of birth on an image is swapped with the day and month of the date of birth in the clinical systems. So we'll raise all of those errors back to Moorfields so that they can continue to improve on their quality. After this, we now have a research database. This is a database full of pseudonymized data in a format that is much more suitable for doing research questions. And we have a massive amount of open source images in DICOM format that can be used for that research. On top of this, we've built a researcher UI. This is a tool which allows the researchers to query the pseudonymous data in conjunction with all of the IG information governance requirements, so IG that would be relevant for that particular user. And it allows them not just to query, but to share those queries with other researchers. And then once they have a set of data that they think is usable for research, making an extract of that data to continue with the information governance process of actually then producing research. If they want to make an extract, it goes to our extract pipeline, where we produce the extract, we produce all the images, we go from pseudonymized to fully anonymous, and then we allow for them to go to the information governance team and discuss any other cleanup that needs to be required before we give them access to the data. So of note, I think, is our internal research platform that we've been building. The important thing here is that we wanted to allow researchers to make tests of the sort of queries they would be running and to see the overviews of the type of data they would be getting without having to first off write a full set of files for information governance to get permission. So we've worked quite closely with the information governance team and the researchers to work out what information is useful, what filters are useful, and what sort of questions they might be asking, whilst allowing them to do it without having to go through information governance first. So we make sure that we show all the important data, so things like your sex, your laterality, so which eye is being assigned, your ethnicity, your age ranges, the number of records you're requesting. And even more than that is we allow them to even go further. We allow them to see the complete row breakdowns of the data, as long as it's over a certain amount of care anonymized, depending on the user, so that they can fully see a sample of the data they'll be requesting and even see row records depending on their level of users. We've spent a lot of time working with IG and restricting which points are available. So there's certain fields which you can filter on but you can't see, and other fields that you can't see but will be included in your data set. So for example, your patient identifiers that you will need in a data set so that you can tell if a patient's the same, but we don't want you to be able to see until you've got that information governance sign off. What we've tried to make sure here is that we don't restrict the extraction of data before approval, but that we make sure that you only get to see the data that you are approved to see. So what does this mean in actual terms for Moorfields? So previously, when we were doing these data sets from 2016 to 2019, a researcher would have to think of a question without necessarily knowing what data exists. They would then have to go and ask information governance if they can even go and question if this research would be possible. After that point, they would have sign off from information governance, and they would come to us, and we would go and produce some statistics about a data set, at which point the researcher will often realize that it's not quite right, and they'll go back to information governance, and you repeat this until the researcher is happy. Then we would go and extract the data, and would then send it again to information governance, who would come back with a set of rules that we need to use to clean it and fully anonymize it until it's acceptable for the researcher wants to do. And we would repeat that until we can finally give them the data set. What we've done instead now is these top 3 steps are now all just this UI tool. So rather than having to think about a question without knowing what data is available and then come to us to make a request and to pull the data out, the UI tool can do that all in one without the need to go to information governance, so that they can see what data is available. They can query it until they can think of a question if they can't think of one without looking at the data. And then they create the extract, and then they come to us and we do the tidying up for them. So that's what's happening internally at Moorfields. Externally, we're also working with HDRUK and the Insight Hub and the Insight Datasets. So this is Moorfields and a couple of other trusts producing data all in the same format, so that you can get data from a wider range than just the London area, which is where Moorfields is focused. The aim here is to work with HDRUK so that external companies and partners can request for data sets based on the metadata we upload. And then we can work with those companies using the same systems we have internally at Moorfields, but on the wider data set, to produce the data sets that you would want to use for your research that will hopefully provide some benefit back to the NHS and to the trust. Our next steps whilst working at Moorfields is we're always trying to add more clinical data. This is time consuming and it requires a lot of time with clinicians and questioning and getting an understanding of what the data means, but also what it means on the different systems and coming up with a single definition for each piece of clinical data. We're continuously trying to improve our handling of different imaging formats. There's constantly new imaging formats and hardware coming out that's always better than the previous one, but it always has a new proprietary format. So we're always trying to improve how we get that back to open source. We are modularizing our work so that the other trusts within Insight can use the same systems that we have. But also that means that when we go to this Insight Hub, the data we're going to be uploading is always going to be identical and the same because we're using the same underlying infrastructure to build it. And we're continuing our work actually building out this Insight Hub to pull the data from the different trusts and upload the metadata as part of HDRUK and produce data sets. So our key takeaways working at Moorfields have been to make sure that you store data in the format that is most relevant to its use. So if you need data for research, but you're getting it from a clinical data source or from other data source, it's often beneficial just to create a whole new data set that is research focused and use that data set that's updated on a daily or weekly schedule rather than querying your live data sets for both performance of your live data sets and your live systems, but also performance of your research data sets. As much as possible, be transparent with your data and don't restrict or blur out what data you have available. Allow people to dig down as much as possible, but remember your information governance concerns and work with that team and don't see them as a blocker, but see them as a valuable part of your organization. And finally, just because you might not think data is useful, once you make it available, you'll often find that people think of questions to ask of it. And we've found a lot that the number of research questions and research data sets we've been producing once we made this UI tool available and made the data easily accessible by researchers has increased massively because they can suddenly, they're not conceptually thinking of questions, but they're finding them out just by looking at the data. So that is extremely valuable. Sorry for being a bit late, so I'm not sure if we're going to have much time for questions, but if you do have any questions, we can try to find some time now, or you can come visit Softwire in our booth, or you can email me or visit our website. I'm going to quickly post a link to the slide deck for you all so that you don't have to try and copy it down from the slides. So hopefully this will work. So yeah, the link there should be in the chat. But if you do have any questions, please let me know.
Thank you, Alex. So it's me again, just to wrap us up before we have a quick break. We are at past now, so I'm afraid we're not going to have time for loads of questions. But Alex, there were a few posted in the Q&A. So if you have time to hang around and reach out to those individuals, I think they'd massively appreciate it. So thank you very much, Alex. Thank you, Softwire, for sponsoring the event. Now we are going to have a 5-minute break, and when we return, you have no less than 4 sessions to choose from. So we'll hear from Christine Goddard and Bonnie Chu on IME equalities data for everyone. So this is looking at how we make sure collecting equalities data isn't some kind of tick box exercise that we just do because we have to, but actually is meaningful for the people for whom you're collecting the data, but also for you as the data user. We have London funders talking about how they analyse the London Community Response Funds. That's £55 million was distributed, and they wanted to make sure that it was distributed particularly to smaller, kind of led by organisations. So they use the data on that fund to see if that was the case or not. So you'll hear from them. We have some wonderful Data for Good group leaders talking about their Data for Good group. So how you set something up in your local community if you do want to do something place-based that coalesces around data. So we've got Tom French, Tom Watson and Pauline Roche, 3 absolute superstars of Data for Good, talking about their experiences and helping you set your own group up. And then finally, we have the SAIL Data Bank, so another wonderful event sponsor. SAIL stands for Secure Anonymised Information Linkage. So this data bank essentially it's a bunch of very sensitive information and data that is linked together. So you've got very, very rich data. So they're talking about how that can be done at the same time, respecting the privacy and anonymity of the people for whom that data is about. And they'll talk a bit about how to access that data as well. So if you think that might be something you want to get your teeth into, then join SAIL. So they're all happening in parallel, and we probably can't split ourselves in 2, though we might want to. But don't worry, everything is recorded, and you will be able to access that. We'll start sending out all those links in the days and weeks following the festival. So don't worry too much if you really want to go to all 4. You'll have a chance to watch back. So that's me. Now I'm going to leave you to have a little break and join one of those sessions at 10:35. Bye all.